We're thrilled to welcome Justin Briggs, partner at Prime Movers Lab, to the show today. Thank you once again for joining us.
Thanks, Drew. It's great to be here.
Yeah, let's kick things off, Justin. Can you share a brief personal intro with us?
Sure, I'm a bit of a weird one. I'm not sure typical MD PhD in biotech. I kind of came up through the ranks, so to speak, working with early stage technology companies, predominantly biotechnology and drug development companies. Um, I was a biochemist by training, but really spent a lot of time on both sides, like wanting to be understanding what was going on within the company and then understanding what was going on in the lab and with the science. And that has kind of cycled. I've gotten the opportunity to work with some amazing people. Spent my entire career in Oklahoma, of all states. Gotten to work across a number of different modalities such as small molecules, large molecules, peptides, vectored vaccines. I've worked on one of the first multiplex diagnostics. I wanted really strongly to go back and work with early stage companies and had the opportunity to meet just the incredible team at Prime Movers Lab. So in May of last year, I joined as a venture partner, and then in September as a biologist and partner, and I support just our incredible portfolio of companies across not just biotech, but 6 different practice areas, which we can get into. But it's my job to support a portfolio, identify new companies, and help them move forward faster.
Fantastic, Justin. I love the overview. We have a lot to dive into today, and I mean, your experience is far and wide. So,
Well, thank you.
before we kind of dive in deep and just kind of continue on the conversation, can you provide a brief intro to Prime Movers Lab for us?
Sure. So Prime Movers Lab is an early stage and full stack venture capital firm focused on supporting breakthrough scientists who have the opportunity to change billions of lives with their technology. What we don't do is make very early stage kind of pre-seed investments. We're not typically the first check unless it's a very serial entrepreneur. We focus on the prime movers that have the opportunity to go into a space and have that full stack understanding and be able to really be these company in the space, the opportunity that will be head and shoulders above the others in the space. We have 6 different practice areas. Human augmentation, which we'll kind of dig into maybe a little bit later, is our healthcare practice. We also have agriculture, which includes a lot of bio and synbio, things like that. And then we have manufacturing, transportation, and infrastructure. And so it's a really diverse group. We have very technical layer of investing partners supported by just a fantastic ops team and portfolio support team. So we really focus on finding the people that you want to spend 10 years with building a company with. No hassles policy is that's table stakes. You really have to go deeper. So we are lead investors, investing out of about a $300 million third early stage fund, investing in seed and Series A. And then we have a growth fund. We had one for about $500 million in 2020, 2021, and 2022. And then in 23, we're looking at a second growth fund as well. So right now we have about 1.2 billion under management, have just incredible companies, which we can dive into. About 5 of the 40 have already IPO'd.
Yeah, it's amazing. I can't wait to dive in. I think it's a fantastic overview on PML, and really excited to jump into our first topic here. Just to start with, and kind of go back in time, I want to just chat more about your journey to VC. Um,
That's a
Professionally, it all started when you pursued biomedical sciences, zoology, and business in undergrad at the University of Oklahoma. I would love to just start here. Just simply what brought you to bio? What made you interested?
I didn't know anything about the biotechnology industry. I was a pre-med student. I wanted to be a surgeon. I had no idea about this world. And so when I got involved with an early stage internship that the university created, the University of Oklahoma, put together what was called the for the Creation of Economic Wealth. It's a mouthful for a title, but what it was taking a faculty professor who had a technology and then taking someone with relevant experience, CEO in the space, maybe the CEO of the startup, if it's already a startup, a local VC, or just a local, very sophisticated business person, and then a group of kind of cross-functional junior, senior, and early graduate school cross-functional teams. And I just loved it. And there was one component of it that was they brought in serial entrepreneurs to come talk about their technologies, once a week as kind of a classroom component. And this guy walks in and he says, so what I do is I work with my partner, and he is a successful serial entrepreneur in biotechnology, took a diagnostics company public. And what we do is we look for intellectual property that is really promising, but it doesn't really have all of the pieces. It needs help to kind of spin out. And then we will work with those founders and we help them create a business. We help them get funding and we help them manage the business. And for a piece of that, we get a little bit of equity. And I just kind of threw all of the MCAT study materials and everything back behind me. And I was like, that is what I want to do with the rest of my life. And so I kind of tried to beat the guy's door down and get an internship. And he said, I have no money, I have no time, I'm not going to train you, I can't, I don't need an internship. And I said, I'm sure there's a bunch of things kind of falling off your plate. Give me one of those projects and I'll go do it. And he said, actually, that's kind of a good idea. So sure. And he said, I'm going to give you a disease. We're creating a multiplex diagnostic. We can both diagnose and prognose rheumatoid arthritis and a number of autoimmune diseases using both our diagnostic and the algorithms and intellectual property related to it. I said, this is really cool. Awesome. And he said, we want to go after a new disease. And I said, sure, what is it? And he said, ankylosing spondylitis. And I said, can you spell that? I'd never heard of it. And so I went home, and in a week I did this brief, and it was a technological assessment, and could we develop it? Is there a need for it? And then how would you actually sell, market, and add it to the product to add value to the company? And it was just, I did 90 hours of work on it in like a week, cranked it out, and got a small internship, and ended up working at that diagnostics company for 6 months or a year, and then moved over to the drug development company where we were working on essentially taking two very things that didn't like each other and trying to put them in the same drug and then deliver it orally all the way to the large intestine, where it would deliver for a long time in a sustained and delayed release fashion. And it was not an easy problem. And so you got to call in, like, who's the best formulation development, drug delivery, drug design person in the world? So we called Bob Langer, and we had a couple of wonderful conversations over a very scratchy conference line phone, and he taught us a lot about how to do the work that we were doing and help us, close a lot of tie off a lot of closed ends or loose ends, things like that. It was a wonderful experience, And then moving over into, but unfortunately the drug, as I mentioned, didn't work. And so I had the opportunity to join this venture accelerator where we took all these early stage companies. And that was a wonderful experience in working on both sides of the table, both looking and scouting for new opportunities and really making sure you have landscape and coverage of a space, talking to everyone, being in the trenches, those kind of things. And then on the other side, really understanding how to develop multiple assets. Each one of these companies were not really even single assets. Some of them had multiple products or even platforms. One was a hearing loss drug that my fantastic colleague, Dr. Elaine Ham at Ascend BioVentures, she ended up finalizing the deal a couple of years ago with Boehringer Ingelheim to sell one of those programs for hearing loss to BI. And then a number of other companies were still very small, very early. And then unfortunately, managing partner had a stroke. So then I rolled off and then joined Scott and Russell. I think that kind of gets us back to today. So it's been a long and winding road just from on the bio side. And it's kind of my second career.
I mean, for that decade, you became an operator and founder in some cases for nearly a dozen biotech, nanotech, robotics, and software companies with multiple exits for more than 100 million in venture backing with various different firms. Looking in that decade, I'd love to ask some critical questions around that, Justin. I mean, could you just tell us more about this time period? What motivated you to work with each of these respective companies?
Probably the most important thing is just to be really, really, really curious. And I think, as I mentioned before about PML, they have the viewpoint that these founders have some of the same problems. And it really resonated with me because that's how I kind of got to work with all these people. I early on in my career, I taught myself to code later, but early I was not a developer. I'm not a great one now, but I'm certainly not a 10x one. I'm probably like a 0.1x or something like that. But in meeting these kind of challenges, you kind of have to figure it out, and you have to get with the technical people to be able to understand how to do it. And so you don't necessarily have to become as technical as them in their field, but you need to be technically proficient to be able to even kind of have a conversation. And so you have to dig into literature, you have to dig into that. And doing early stage drug development, you really learn to learn. You really learn to, as a scientist, you learn to learn. It's a process. And so kind of what I learned was to be as scrappy as hell. I mean, I was from Oklahoma. I had to be. If you talk to the biotech entrepreneurs around here, it's not the old West, but they're just as hardened as it was in the past. It was very much being scrappy, but that exposed me to a number of different kind of founders, both the kind of founders you want to back and the kind of founders you really regret backing, and the kind of team that when bad things happen, everybody rises up. And then I've worked on teams where when even good things happen, knives come out. And so it just taught me a lot about the diversity of founders and how team is so important in construction, and just to, not say no to an opportunity just because it's not perfectly within your wheelhouse.
I think that's amazing advice for people starting their career. I mean, continuing on, that scrappy mentality obviously shows with everything you've done. And it's amazing to see your transition now to PML, like you talked about. And I can already tell a few battle scars are kind of appearing on the back end, right? Of, some good teams, some bad teams, and some learned experiences. So excited to dive into that. I think just as a quick aside and a question, was venture a natural step in your career? Did you feel that that was something that was calling to you?
In hindsight, it should have. But from the get-go, it was very much I wanted to be like a biotech CEO. And then it was either kind of a mix of I don't know if I'd be the best biotech CEO, or that I told somebody one time that in the venture community, I've met people that are professional, and I've met people that are genuine. There's not a whole lot of folks that are both. You add a layer of technical proficiency and a layer of kind of responsiveness and things like that. And it's easy to be a investor. It's hard to be a good VC. And early in my career, I just looked at people with money as investors. And I didn't have I was just very super naive, and it was, they're just taking a piece of our, pound of flesh and all this kind of stuff. In a lot of ways, we were in kind of the flyover country where you don't have as many knowledgeable investors. And so the ratio of knowledgeable investors in the room compared to where I'm in now is very different. But that doesn't mean there are not some great local investors. But you deal with a lot of folks where if they can't pull it out of the ground and hold it in their hand, they can't really understand it. And biotech has a lot of what do you call soft or intangible intellectual property, a lot of conceptual intellectual property. It's very, it's very, very different. And so you need to work with investors that really understand. They don't have to have invested in your space. They don't have to have worked in your space, but they do need to have empathy for you and your situation. And they do need to understand somewhat of what you're going through. And if they can't, it's up to you to take their money. And so I had a taste of being a VC during the venture accelerator, but it's not really a true VC. Doing true venture capital, I think, is fundamentally different. And I did not have the respect for it that I have now.
Really, I mean, just really interesting. I mean, as someone who has had a wide breadth and experience with a bunch of different investors, when you're making that transition, I mean, among the potential venture firms, what prompted you to join Prime Movers in specific?
So when I left, TetherX was the group with the Alexion scientific founders. When I left, I wanted to go start a small fund, be based in Oklahoma, invest anywhere, that kind of thing. Big ideas, regardless of geography. and a wise guy, not a wise guy, but a wonderful guy, said, you know what, you've shown that you had operator experience, that kind of entrepreneurial experience, you can identify the founders, technically proficient, but I don't quite have that bigger picture of you, being able to kind of hand deals to the bigger firms and support your companies to help them get their later stage funding, because you'll be a small early stage firm for quite a while. I said, that's great advice. And he kind of chuckled that I would probably end up with a job at the end of it. And so what ended up happening is I reached out to about a dozen firms. And I would say 6 of them were wonderful, wonderful firms, made some great friends. One of those firms was Prime Movers, and they were actively looking to identify a bio partner to come in and support their human augmentation practice. It's a bit different. They think of human augmentation as, or healthcare as human augmentation, because it's much more, healthcare versus sick care and all those kind of things. We're looking at, expanding biology, taking biology step changes, things like that. We're looking at areas that are very, very overlooked or heretofore were too difficult and intractable, like neuroscience. We've invested in paragenomics, invasive brain-computer interface, cognition, non-invasive brain-computer interface. We've invested in kind of drug discovery with Gordian Bio. We've invested in longevity, and that's one of our core pillars as well, with Elevian, a great early stage company working on growth differentiation factor 11, entering the clinic right now. And then some really exciting early stage companies that I can probably talk about a little bit later, but it was being challenged and saying, okay, I'll take your challenge accepted, let's go. And what it ended up with was getting the dream job. It was getting the opportunity to work at a firm that not only cares about the area that you do, but cares about science and scientists and scientific entrepreneurs in the way that I do.
That's fantastic, Justin. I really appreciate the insights and just the transition overall. It's just super fascinating. I think the question that I would have as well, just looking at your previous experience, I mean, how did your various operating roles really prepare you for venture?
I would say it's taught me what not to do. It's when you're interacting with founders and when founders are interacting with VCs, it can go 1,000 different directions. And I've had wonderful interactions in the past, and I've had not so wonderful interactions in the past. And just seeing how we were treated as a company gave me a lot of empathy for the portfolio companies and the people that I talk to. It's a complex, fast-paced, industry, and you've got to have kindness, and you've got to have responsivity, and but you also have to be very frank with folks and just say, even if you really like it, you just have to, say this is just not a fit, and here's why. A lot of folks will just drop off and never hear from them again. We try to do our best to provide feedback so that folks can understand, if you want to work with us, this is what we'd like to see, or this is what you would need to prove, or you're too early, or in many cases, you're too far along. And so really having that kind of, I've been in their shoes, I don't want to get, I don't want to say anything ill about anybody, but I've just been in their shoes. So.
No, big time. I mean, empathy is a big thing in this game. I appreciate the openness and responsiveness of founders. I mean, really is everything. Do you have any advice for founders or operators that are considering the same pivot you made?
Oh, from operations to VC?
Exactly, yeah.
Oh, I would say that everyone who is a scientific or technical person who wants to lead an organization should, want to learn the full side, both sides of the table. I think it's important. I think a lot of folks take a internship or a fellowship or kind of short-term role with a venture firm for granted, or at least I thought so in the past, and then had the wonderful opportunity. We find technical fellows and try to expose them to venture capital in a really kind of in-depth way. So we bring fellows on, and we choose to landscape an area. I'm working with a fantastic diagnostics fellow right now named Ted Ling Hugh from Northwestern. We've got a number of others in robotics, in battery, in energy grid, in synbio, all kinds of different areas. And bringing a technical person in and exposing them to that area, exposing somebody who's already in finance to more finance is, expose the finance people to the operation side, like tell them to go do like CFO roles for, intern money for, startup biotechs, and learn what biotech needs from a financial perspective rather than just telling them what they need. And so for a technical person, let's bring them over into the venture side because they know the scientific diligence side very well. We understand obviously the kind of traditional venture diligence. Can you scale it? Can you build it? Can you hire? Do you have that resource magnetism? Can you raise? All that kind of stuff. And so exposing the young folks, it's, I think, at least so far, from about half dozen folks that we've had through the program so far, it's been a wonderful, wonderful program. So I would say everyone who's technical should want to learn the financial side, which is really the venture side. The folks who are financial, if they want to learn the technical side, I don't know if just jumping into biotech VC is the right way to do that, unless you've really got both the technical and the scientific.
I think it's definitely a good call out. And speaking of venture, I think I'd love to jump to our next topic for a portfolio overview. I think what's fascinating, I mean, Prime Movers Lab isn't really shy about your mission to fund scientific startups founded by the world's prime movers. And that's, by your definition, inventors who transform billions of lives across energy, transportation, infrastructure, manufacturing, human augmentation, and agriculture. Just from your own perspective, can you share more about what prime mover founders really mean to PML, and potentially just share more about what indeed just makes a breakthrough scientific startup for your team?
Impact, huge amounts of impact. It's an absolute privilege to work with the founders that we have at Prime Movers. It really is. They are some of the just most incredible people. We spent a week with them, and I've only joined last year, so I have not met all of them yet, and I still hope to. But even just in the current portfolio of the new companies that we have, by the time this will be published, it will be announced that we just invested in Morphoceuticals, David Kaplan, Michael Levin, CEOs Michael Hufford, just an incredible team, literally regrowing human limbs using a number of different strategies that I won't go into. But you may or may not have heard of Dr. Levin. Mike is just a preeminent both software engineer, computer scientist, as well as biologist. David Kaplan's one of the most published people I think I've ever met. And then in the other case, we closed on Dimension Inks. Dimension Inks is an early stage biomaterials platform. They are essentially 3D printing the substrate for life. They take grass components, generally recognized as safe, stuff that's been in other medical devices, other things like that, known for a long time. They iterated relentlessly, 200 different formulations, every color, every porosity, everything, not just tiny little iterations, fully finished 200 different formulations. And then they brought in a founder, co-founder later on to be CEO, Carolyn Nowitzki-Collins. She had worked both in kind of 3D printing and manufacturing, but she was an MD, and she had worked both on the venture side with Arch Development Partners, as well as some early stage companies in the kind of Chicagoland area after graduating from medical school. And so you have this kind of founder that is fit for purpose. She has been a founder before. She has been on the other side of the table with the venture community. She is a technical MD. She has some experience in 3D manufacturing. She may not be Adam Jacobs, absolute material scientist master, who is the co-founder. And she may not be the bioengineering professor at Northwestern, Ramil Shah, who invented kind of the initial platform and brought Adam Jacobs from Georgia Tech as a postdoc to come help them build that lab. But what she was is a catalyst. When she came in, then it changed. Their trajectory changed dramatically. Having founders that are scientific, it's very hard to find a founder that's scientific and business savvy and can really do both sides of those things. And they're very rare, but they do exist. So we've got someone like Harold Ock, who is a medical doctor. He is a cardiologist. He is a transplant surgeon, as well as CEO of Iviva. So he's a fantastic entrepreneur, incredibly scrappy, even though they're coming out of, Mass General Hospital and things like that. You'd be amazed at how much they get done and they're trying to essentially create an artificial pancreas and an artificial kidney so that patients who would be going to dialysis or at-home dialysis or any kind of hemodialysis could potentially not. You have a small implant implanted under your skin. Having these kind of opportunities, it's really, 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 really hard. It takes a long time. These are not single assets. These are not small, I think we can make a 5x return, and it makes numbers on the back end. When you're writing and supporting initial and follow-on checks and making these core positions in a very high growth fund, if you want to have the opportunity to create many multiples of a fund, you cannot make that up on 5x returns. You can't 10x a fund on 5x returns, I guess would be a flippant way to view it. And so whether it's the advice for folks making that transition or just people who are actively doing it, you really have to bridge the opportunity and the returns and then draw that straight line between them. And if you can draw that straight line between the opportunity and the potential returns, then everything makes perfect sense. Otherwise, it's just not a fit. And there are other firms that have different remits, that have different scopes, that have different lines they draw between opportunity and return.
As always, the best way to describe what you're looking for and what founders you like to work with is always the ones you've already invested in. I think it's fantastic to hear Michael Levin and the fantastic folks that you all have been able to work with. I think thematically, one thing I'm really curious about with prime movers, I mean, your role on the PML team is both the biologist and an investment partner. I'm just really curious, how does the firm develop investment theses? You discussed this briefly with some of the fellows that you're bringing on, but could you share what they are today and what that process is overall?
Sure. We take a very broad view of the space, and then we do what's called essentially landscaping, where we either bring on a fellow or we do it internally. We may bring on advisors or external stakeholders in specific areas, and we dive deep. We essentially plant our stake in the ground. We say, right now we're looking at diagnostics companies. So we're going to be doing webinars and white papers or technical papers on the space. We're going to be writing blog posts where we mention 50 startups, and we haven't not made really a diagnostics investment yet. So we're literally kind of lining it out there ahead of time who we think are already people in the space. What that does is it causes everything to kind of rise to the top. It allows the people to say, oh, wow, now I'm kind of actively fundraising. I'm in diagnostics. I see that they're putting out content pieces. I had never even heard of them, or I'd never had access, whatever. We've put our flag out there, reach out to us directly. Then we go out and scout. We go into those spaces. You cannot move into a space or traverse a landscape unless you really know the terrain, because if you're blindfolded, you're never going to get there. So you've got to landscape, you've got to understand the space. As you're doing, you're writing some really, really wonderful stuff for the BIOS Substack or blog, and each one of those is a learning exercise. It's an ability to expand your skills. It's an ability to also put your flag in the ground and let startups come to you. I think that's a really good strategy. I think it's something that is important for companies to do, because otherwise you're just kind of, well, we're a biotech fund. And well, what kind of biotech? What's your entry point? What's your check size? All those kind of things. Those things are important. So when we go into an area, we want to have coverage, meaning that we have moved around the landscape a lot, but also we know where the high points are. We know how to view and how to do things without bringing in expensive instruments and things like that. I'm not going to sextants and whatnot from totally killing this analogy now. But at the same time, like, you really need to know the space. You really need to plant your flag, and then you need to have good coverage over the space. And once you have those, then you can be really confident that you're making good investments, because otherwise you're really kind of shooting blanks.
I completely agree. And I think looking at the space piece by piece, doing your research, going in is always, perfect way. Not just saying we're a biotech fund. I really appreciate the diligence you all do and the focus you have. I think it's fascinating. I think kind of applying that to a mentality or different trends, as you all just focus so much on the future, what's current, what's happening, what's next. I'd love to kind of press a question towards you. I mean, really historically, the philosophy of investment in tech has been always quite different from biotech. Yet in recent years, we've really seen a convergence of the two models in the melding of technology and bio to really develop tech bio platforms.
Absolutely.
Really where the platform itself is the most powerful asset.
Mhm.
Can you share more about your thoughts on this trend and how it's changing your research, how it's changing your thoughts in the space? I mean, I'd love to just hear where you see the frontier of computation having the greatest impact in tech bio, digital health, life sciences, and really just healthcare in general today.
Worked with a number of folks in the space. I was kind of trying to apply a number of computational methods to large data sets in kind of the 1819 space. Really wanted to kind of build in some tech bio stuff before our managing partner had a stroke back in kind of the 2017 time, before I joined the founders of Alexion. The ability to leverage machine learning, algorithmic optimization, our ability to relatively inexpensively access very, very large data sets are a huge opportunity in healthcare, period. And we're seeing that across pretty much everything. Yeah, that's the whole kind of software's eating the world. In my opinion, that's only part of the story, because that only gets you so far. Open data sets only get you so much. The best algorithm from a foundational model, you can only optimize it so much from where that foundational model goes in terms of kind of custom training, things like that. It's very hard to put in reinforcement loops and continuous learning and things like that. But that is truly where the power is. It's not necessarily reinforcement learning or continuous learning. It is that feedback, that design, build, test, learn loop. Because as you iterate, if that's a 6-month cycle of design, build, test, learn, multi-year cycle or multi-month cycle, if that can be days, hours, instead of weeks, months, years, then it totally changes your ability to learn. So each data point, you're able to go on a much faster learning curve. There are a lot of people who are making very large claims that have not really done the work yet. There's a lot of people that are saying, I've pulled a protein out of thin air, when really they've optimized a protein, starting with all sorts of mutant data, all sorts of see all that kind of stuff. That's a little frustrating to me, because the press community doesn't understand the difference, and so they kind of jump on things. Just like back in the if you the old adage is that cancer's been cured tons of times in animals, just not in humans. And the press often jumps out and does that. So but they don't know any better. It's not their fault. They're misled by the company, things like that. There are companies that are trying to make larger claims than they should. I think in tech bio, those companies that are really doing things, and it's a true mix of wet lab and dry lab, are going to make much faster iteration cycles. Even if you're using a CRO, you make pretty good cycles. Obviously, you want to optimize that over time, perhaps bring some things internal so that you can just move faster and iterate quicker. And then no matter how good your dry lab, your computational team is, the field moves incredibly fast. So if you have a team that's like, we want to do it this way, this is our kind of approach, this is our algorithm, and they just constantly want to improve that one algorithm. It's the classic where you're frustrated because an academic has no kind of market knowledge, and so they're just like, we have a tech and we have a solution, and we just want to try it on everything, and we just think our tech is the best, and they're not focused on the problem. If you're focused on the problem, and if you have that really tight design, build, test, learn cycle, and you have a really good mix of dry and wet lab, you can make incredible progress. I think we're still right in the middle of that wave. I don't think we're kind of already made a lot of the big bets. I think a lot of the first wave of those, and yes, we've all seen that in the terms of the stock price, but what we haven't seen is necessarily a whole bunch of things failing. A couple of things early on, but I think these companies are going to have a higher chance for success. We as a firm at Prime Movers, we don't take single asset risk. So we do really like platforms. The other thing is, what we don't do is we don't only invest in software. The founders felt, Dakin Sloss, felt that when this firm was first starting, there were already so many firms that were like, sorry, deep tech and biotech, we only invest in software. And the mass proliferation of those firms led to a lot of frustrated founders where it's like, gosh, they took the meeting and I spent an hour with them and they don't invest in stuff like us. And so we say we do not invest in only software. You've got to have some physical component, either a drug or a medical device or a diagnostic. I believe that we are at the point where the ability to massively multiplex, to do things in high throughput, to do things at the single cell level, and then to do them computationally in silico before you ever put it in a dish and model it and predict whether or not that experiment is going to be positive. And if you have low confidence, you don't do the experiment. And if you have mid-level to high-level confidence, you certainly probably do the experiment. We are going to move so much faster. So much faster. And we're seeing that. There's a big separation between the companies that are gazelles and the companies that are elephants. And when you look at the elephants and you start to unpack them and you go, what are their characteristics? And they farm everything out. They rely on university technology. They don't, no, I will say a lot of universities can't help move very fast. So I don't think that's an appropriate thing to say. Yeah, I don't think it's appropriate to say that. But you have the opportunity, there's a huge separation and band gap between those kinds of and idiotypes of startups. And so we look for the archetypes of really fantastic, either founder CEO or CEO who is just super fit for purpose. They do not have to be like our person. They, we really hope that this team is already in place. We only do price rounds, so it's very important for us for this to be everything in place. But for TechBio, we can't just do the software algorithm, and we can't we can't just do the kind of single asset. We've got a SynBio and it's this one thing. We take more of a platform approach. Do I think that DeSci and do I think that decentralized science, LabDAO, VitaDAO, the molecule guys are wonderful. You have the opportunity to use computation and literally pull a protein full-length monoclonal antibody out of thin air, like Antiverse is able to do. Or you're at the limit of detection. We talk a lot about the limits of detection, because for the longest time, you could only do things one at a time, 2 at a time, 4 at a time, 8 at a time. Now you're talking about 1,500, at a time. You've got these massively multi-channel plates. With DNA, you're doing things, on a chip at the million scale per replicate. You've got lots of different opportunities to move these things forward. And then when you move into the other spaces, the thematic spaces that you can really apply TechBio, it's going to be a TechBio company that solves longevity unless the asset has already been discovered, because most of those new things are kind of longevity based or are platform for discovering things out of gene networks and microbiome or whatever. I do think that the multiomics is going to go through a big improvement, because we've only been able to do a couple of layers, transcripts and multiomics is really only a couple of omics. And now we're really getting into like true multi-omics, that like we are going to be able to have potentially in this generation of startups, next 5, 10, maybe 15, 20 years, potentially some of the last diagnostics, therapeutics discovery platforms ever. That we do. Like, everyone kind of laughed when Zuckerberg was like, we could, potentially, cure all diseases in the next 100 years. I'm not saying we actually have line of sight yet, but it is a really exciting time to be in TechBio. It's a really exciting time to be in biotechnology. What's the difference between TechBio and biotech? It just depends on which voice is louder. Either you've got more folks on the tech side and their voice is louder, you got more folks on the bio side and you're bio-driven. Whether that's a modern way of looking at it or a traditional way of looking at it, I don't know. But we are close to having line of sight on solving disease, not just a couple of them, but diseases en masse. We have the opportunity, things like morphoceuticals, to control human anatomy. And it's amazing. We have the ability to print human anatomy at scale, to mention inks. We have the ability to potentially rejuvenate your organs. Elevian. We have the potential to pull antibodies out of thin air. And Antiverse. We have the potential to shrink an entire pathology lab down to the size of a box on a bench, or Iviva. We have a number of amazing opportunities. We actually have a way to save the bees. We just invested in, it was an agriculture investment, but it was a vaccine technology that is tackling American and European foul brood. It is a bacterial infection that is one of the main causes of colony collapse disorder. And it's one of the things that if it happens to your colony, as I understand you're a apist there, Drew, you have this very, very horrible outcome where you have to shut down any other commercial hives in the area in case they get infected. You have to burn the hive. You even have to burn your tools because they're spore formers, and so the spores will live there forever, and you have to bury all that equipment. It's very expensive, otherwise you're going to get any other things. So biology has the opportunity, as Mark Andreessen said, software is eating the world. We are now in a phase where biology is eating the world, and a lot of the chemists are going, and this is pretty sweet because we're already starting to notice that to take biology to the next level, you really kind of need to be biochemists and really have chemistry help that. And then it all comes back to being able to use computer science to be able to iterate all between them. So it's really the combination of physics, computer science, as well, biology and chemistry. And the companies that really have all three of those on lockdown, those are the gazelles. And those are really going to be the prime movers. And when they're led by prime movers, that's when we really want to get involved.
Thank you for the overview. And I think, I love the analogy, elephants and gazelles. I think that's fantastic. But it's a great segue in conversation to the companies you're invested in and what you're particularly focused on. I mean, you mentioned dimension and longevity and just the focus of full stack of what this impact could really be in the next 100 years. For you as an investor, I'm just really curious overall, for perhaps maybe using one or more of these companies as an example, how do you really separate signal and noise when evaluating those specific companies and where you want to put your investment?
So probably the best example I could give would be the most recent investment, Dimension Inc. So Dimension Inc.'s based in Chicago, Illinois, developing a platform to essentially create the substrate for life. Hard tissue, soft tissue, bone, and even bioscaffolds for various organs, which they call tissue papers, which is adorable. But they're a phenomenal startup. Every single person in the company is just top-notch. They are, despite the fact that they're in flyover country, and they have a huge pipeline of all these different things. But and as I mentioned, they had 200 different eggs, but they simplified and they focused on just a couple, and they focused on the applications thereof. So rather than selling organoids, rather than selling, trying to be over the counter or something, trying to do something really strange, what they did was they said, where can we improve upon the existing technology, but also create a line of sight for our bigger goals? So their bigger goals are not bone or tissue. The bigger goals are replacing organs. In 2018, they were able to, this is a very crude way to describe it, ice cream scoop out or remove the internal tissue from the ovary in essentially a mouse, and then put their bioscaffold in, and then take a oocyte, which they had genetically modified to express green fluorescent protein, so that if rather than the mother's own eggs, but just this oocyte actually gave birth, they would have glowing green pups. They implant the oocyte, have bright green glowing pups. Second generation, perfectly healthy, bright green glowing pups. They were able to restore fertility in a sterile mouse. This is a huge milestone, but to get that to market will be many, many years. It will take several years, lots of iteration. So they said, what materials do we use in that? Backed it up and they said, hey, we use the same materials as a bunch of other things. So if we actually, that's going to take longer to prove out, we line these other things up, we'll actually be able to get revenues, partnerships, de-risks, get 510K approval, and be able to scale their products, not just on the hard tissue, but the soft tissue and some of these organ recovery and organ regeneration programs that they're also starting to work on. So you have this ability to draw a line very clearly. And so when we went out, we landscaped, we wrote thought papers, we did webinars, we did the whole 9 yards to be able to say, this is an area we want to look at. My colleague, Dr. Amy Cruz, she was our general partner, now venture partner. And what she was able to do is essentially shortlist and say, here's a bunch of the ones I've talked to, but here's a bunch more. And I also want another list of a whole bunch, even more. We need to speak with everyone. So we talked to everybody, early stage, late stage, public, private, everything. And we said, what are the things? What are the levers by which we need to be looking at? We're very impressed, but what are we missing? And so being able to go talk to their partners, their diligence requires not just taking your word for it, but it means goes and talking to your partners, talking to your academic collaborators, talking to your other board members, talking to customers, partners, the whole nine yards, to be able to understand, are they really saying what they mean? And in this case, yes, absolutely. And so we were really excited to get involved. So when I say it's a relationship and it takes time to be able to get an investment, like calling us up and saying, hey, I got to close in 2 weeks, you want to put $500,000 in? That's just not what we do. We do the work and we have to lead the investment, and therefore we have to have all of that viewpoint around. It is more invasive. We are more invasive money, but in our minds, we are more confident and more convicted than others. So.
Yeah, I mean, fantastic. And as an addition to that, I mean, do you have recommendations above that for founders reaching out to prime movers?
Don't do the thing I just said, where you say, hey, we are a larger check investor. We are a lead investor. We like to do lead the seed, lead the Series A, and then follow on with our growth fund. That doesn't mean we will not take a look at it. We even will go straight in with the growth fund in Series B and C opportunities if the technology and the team is right and the timing's right. But start developing relationships. Start developing friendships if at all possible. You don't have to be selling them. It's almost more helpful to be like, hey, I saw this interesting thing, just so like, even if they've already heard about it, it's like, hey, that's another proof point. Do those kind of things. When I was trying to get early consulting work, I would just kind of like randomly send people ideas, and half the time they'd be like totally ignore it, and then every once in a while they'd answer it, and I'd end up with a new friend or a work colleague or somebody I ended up working with for quite a while. Who knows? Same as in venture. I'm in venture today because I cold called a dozen VCs.
Taking this forward, I mean, looking at how founders are reaching out to you and kind of pivoting slightly, I'd love to kind of dive into PML's platform for support for founders. Everything on the back end for portfolio support. I mean, looking at your own thought leadership, when you have folks like Bill Gross saying your team is unequivocally the best firm he chooses to work with, you must be onto something. And I'd love to dive into more of the portfolio.
This was driven by Dakin and the team early on. I am constantly blown away by the caliber of the founders and repeat founders, but also the caliber of our team and how far they go for our founders. So we don't say, hey, here's a technical recruiter that we like. We have our own talent partner. Ashley, she worked at, I believe, Founders Fund and a bunch of others back in the past. She really wanted to be the talent partner that supports these breakthrough scientific founders. And so no matter the technical area, that's the person you want helping hire a super high level person. Our government relations and communications person, Gavin, is absolutely top of his field. We bring on every investment partner that we have is technically proficient in the area in which they invest. So we don't have people who are very well-meaning and experienced, but don't have the background to be able to diligence it. You really need to have the background to be able to diligence. And then we bring in other folks to help support that diligence, so that we're not taking, kind of like that only focused on your area kind of myopic view. We really want to provide other perspective. As I mentioned, we don't have an office, so we spend that capital on our founders to connect better with them, to make them more connected, and to make them more exposed to other founders. Because I think that's one of the greatest things is when you're all developing cancer drugs, everybody's kind of, but when you've got, you're standing next to somebody who literally is from Overview Energy or was the former administrator of NASA, and he's one of our CEOs, and Cam Gafarian, who has started Axiom Space and X Energy and all these things, is just giving this keynote that just melt your face, and you're sitting there next to Michael Hufford, the CEO of Morphoceuticals, and Annette from Dallin, and then you've got the guys from Overview Energy, which are engineers that have worked with Tesla and NASA and SpaceX and everything, and they're literally redirecting the sun to make solar panels more efficient and to beam energy straight to Earth in a much higher throughput way, so that we can power our future. I mean, and it's just an incredible group of people. And so how do you help them on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis? We don't just write a check and sit on a board. We are on a weekly call. I'm on, you're kind of constant. So many firms, like, you might be in his text messages or DMs, but it's for like a short period of time, like around the past or around the investment. For us, it's like the longer we're with you, the closer we are getting. You know what I mean? It's a long-term process. You're going to be in the boardroom either monthly or quarterly for a long time. You're going to be talking with them and working through. We're not the kind of firm that just says, go lay people off because times are tough. Like a lot of people had to go through. Like I went and I sat with the company and we went through some really hard decisions and we did it together. That is what's required to help companies these days. And I'm sorry, but just having the biggest following or being the most storied firm, you're only as good as your current deals. I don't care what you've done in the past. I don't care how proficient you are. If you're not good at your job, or your associates or your principals or your partners are not everything that your company was 20 years ago or 10 years ago, then you're only as good as they are. And so we have to be even better, because we are a new fund. We were founded in, I believe, the end of 2018. So we're about a 4 or 5 year old firm. We have to play at a higher level or we will never get to that level. And so to get the best founders and to really work with the Bill Grosses, you have got to go above and beyond.
How you all operate is absolutely fantastic. I think coming from this problem from a different angle, and how you are helpful to companies and how you're thinking about being a long-term partner with a lot of the companies that you're invested in right now. Today, we're really seeing as much innovation on the business side as we're seeing on the science side of life sciences. And innovation can at times be ahead of the market. I'm really curious about prime movers perspective and your own, Justin. Can you share more about how you think about go-to-market strategy and the company journey for the next wave of biotech startups?
Ooh, that's a very, very, very good question. So I'm one of those people where a lot of people don't like orthogonal ideas. I love orthogonal ideas. So if someone comes and they're like, we're going to do things a little bit differently, a lot of people will say that's non-traditional. We don't want to support that. I'm happy to. At the same time, you really need to have a very clear and concise story as to why. And so I've been involved with a number of companies where we had great regulatory people, and I became a student of kind of regulatory affairs. Michael Hufford from Morphoceuticals, as he likes to say, it's the coin of the realm. That is how we progress as companies in biotechnology. And so not understanding that, or not knowing how to shorten those times to market, but in terms of go to market, it's not just the walk through the regulatory path. It's where you start monetizing on that. A lot of people just see that as the end, very much at the end on the other side of the forest. Scrappy companies are able to either create new assets that they can part out. Platform technologies have this opportunity, create your core assets, and then kind of here's our assets that are more opportunistic. When brass tacks comes in, if a big partner comes in and is like, yeah, but can we have one of those big ones? It's like, yeah, it's kind of hard to say no, you know what I mean? And so the having that go to market where you have that optionality, platforms and things like that is hugely important. But also being able to understand that path and say, I can do it in a year instead of 2, or I can make money early on. I really loved some of the work that groups like Antiverse, Pepper Bio, a number of these companies where they have big platform, big drug discovery opportunities. They can go after anything they want. And they say, here's the things we're going to do, and here's the things we're not going to do. And they're very clear about that. And that gives them the opportunity to either say, okay, here's the things we need to make sure we have we're capturing most of the value on. And then here's the things where we don't care about capturing all that much value on, but it gives us some data. It gives us some credibility. It gives us whatever revenue, whatever we need to be able to move forward. Having that in the early days is great. What I also want to see is that they've thought about, okay, as soon as this proves out or works, Now we want to press the pedal down, and now we want to really go, because we're trying to invest right at that inflection point so that we can support just before that and then help them drive up through that. And so go-to-market is really, really important. The bee vaccine was a huge question around how do we get it to market? And, obviously they've done all the regulatory work that we were so impressed by. They created a path for invertebrate vaccines. There's never been an invertebrate, not a bee, but any kind of arthropod, which a lot of agriculture is based on arthropods for a number of different reasons and purposes. But they in particular went after the bees. And so now you can't ship a vaccine and sell it in another country, but you can ship a vaccinated queen. So now you have a go-to-market where you have a customer that has been not as competitively advantaged or well positioned as they might have been. And now they're really got an advantage. Maybe a short duration advantage until we get European approval, but at the same time, that allows you to get some pull into the market, creating that pull, because you're pushing. You're like, as a startup, you're pushing. You're like often feeling like you're beating your head against the wall. And so it's nice to be able to find little avenues that'll pull. And if you create enough of those threads, it's not always your main industry that you're going after, but you got to be creative and you got to figure out the ways to move forward. Otherwise, you won't survive. Survival is everything. You can't be fit if you're dead. You know what I mean?
100%. And as an aside, my bees and I thank you and the company for the work y'all are doing. So big shout out. Looking forward to approval and how that pipeline figures out. But
Annette and Dolly are fantastic, and the rest of their team are wonderful. So you've got good people in your corner.
Oh yeah, 100%. Looking forward to it. I think I'd love to transition and just start talking about catalyzing the next era of bioinnovation. You all do a lot of market research. You look into a lot of different areas, companies on a diverse breadth and depth. What have you been seeing from founders in terms of the next cycle of emerging technologies? I mean, I really just love to hear more about what you're most excited by.
You're going to continue to see a divergence from the folks that get it and the folks that don't. And the founders that really can put the right pieces together and move super fast separate themselves from the people who struggle putting those kind of things together. We are going to continue to see improvements and impacts of AI. We are absolutely, and those are going to be pretty, I think, specific, because we're finally going to be able to get to the kind of things where we're getting to the space where we can put the right samples in the dish and say, we've got 98 wells and we're confident that we're doing 98 tests in the right way, 15, 30, or whatever you're doing, whatever your platform. That's a really big superpower. And so that can help us unlock even more biology. In diagnostics, as I mentioned before, that limit of detection, that not needing, once you have single molecule detection, once you have single, atomic level resolution or subatomic level resolution, where do you go from there? So we have the potential to invest in the last generation of diagnostics. As we saw earlier this year, one of the portfolio companies that we have saw where a lot of the technical barriers to fusion are being reduced to practice. We do not have a net energy commercial fusion energy facility, but we are getting ever closer to the most powerful lasers to be able to achieve that. And they did achieve that this year at Lawrence Livermore Laboratories. And as they continue to scale, Focus Energy and others will be able to unlock more and more energy and more net positive, hopefully one day. If not, they'll sell a lot of lasers along the way. And so you have these opportunities for orthogonal business models. Deep tech is becoming more important than ever before, not only because of climate, but because of the ability to rebuild, reconstruct everything around us using biochemistry. Because for the longest time, it was using the best materials around, whatever we had available. But now, whether it's I want a carbon negative wood with this characteristic, I can get it. There's a big debate right now around like humanoid or non-humanoid robotics. Same thing, DNA camp, the RNA camp, or DNA, RNA camp, protein camp. The truth is somewhere in the middle. But having the tools to be able to move faster, move like gazelles, create new products, create a platform of products, get really advanced modalities. I do think there's some really interesting things in the drug delivery space around obviously delivery of specific either AAVs or capsids or lipid nanoparticles or whatever to specific spaces. That's still a challenge, but there's a lot of good companies with good technologies in that space. So I think we're on that path. I do think that once we're able to selectively deliver medications, selectively knock in to the specific cells or cell types or tissues or tissue types or whatever, and that fidelity of the dial gets stronger and stronger, then there's going to be even more of an opportunity for some really exciting platform companies that leverage kind of agnostic to the modality or delivery or whatever. It's, I just need to solve this problem, and so I need an mRNA with a bubble, or I need a antibody that has this kind of tropism or this kind of AAV that hits these kind of those kind of things. But right now there's a lot of single asset, there's a lot of small players with lots of promise, and so there's going to be a lot of shuffling, and there's going to be a lot of churning in this market. And so I'm really excited to see what big kind of really next generation thoughtfulness can be brought to those spaces, because you do have the opportunity to take an orthogonal approach that's really potentially more of a top-down rather than a bottom-up approach, to be able to manipulate biology in ways that we never thought possible.
Love the inspiring future forward mentality of everything that Prime Movers has to offer. And it's just great hearing it from your lens, Justin. It's so inspiring.
Also, we need to blow up the bioreactor. So
yeah, we're
we'll leave us with that. Yeah, bioreactor is a enclosed bucket. It's a jug, and we can do better. So anybody working on bioreactors and really, really interesting stuff in that space, let's chat.
Yeah. Anything else you're bearish on, by the way? Anything else that you're like, no way, gotta change it? Calls for startups on, we need this?
There's several things that I think we really need to improve upon. I think at-home testing needs to take another evolution bigger. I think we can go bigger. I think can be more things done at home more easily than the current kind of lateral flow and prick your finger kind of stuff. I think that we have as I mentioned, bioreactors and continuous biomanufacturing versus batch fed. I think we have the opportunity to go self-free on a whole lot of things. Kind of going back to that design, build, test, learn. Those ones that really. So if you're like we understand this better than others, then I want to talk, because that really, and design of experience is hard. Like, it's really hard. I've talked with a couple of design of experiments startups, but it's a hard problem, and if there's some things to do there, I think that's also an important space. And then I think AI to help us uncover spurious results needs to come more to the fore, so that we can get some of the confounding data out of literature. I think everybody would have a better time with that, and we wouldn't be reading the same papers that were defunct later, retracted, and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, that would be pretty dang nice.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
I'm looking forward to that era, seriously. Well, I mean, you got the funds, you got the team that you're building. What's coming next for Prime Movers Lab? What are you all looking at for the next? We
have some wonderful things in the pipeline. We have some amazing events, amazing content, and just getting out there. We're constantly growing, constantly improving, and we don't want to make a lot of the same mistakes as colleagues in the past. So we like working with people like Alex, Drew, yourself, Chaz, Chris, some of the other guys, the ability to be a flag for others, and to be a not a call to arms, but a call to camaraderie, I think is really, really important. There's a lot of early on in my career, I thought there was a lot of startups hated each other and VCs hated each other, and startups and VCs didn't really like each other, but it was kind of a relationship of necessity. Working with great people is so important, and so it's just awesome to work with the group at PML with great co-investors like Alex and a bunch of others. It's a good time to be in venture, despite what you hear on the news.
No, we love conversing, and I mean, honestly, just the people forward mentality of getting everybody together. I love it. A huge fan, huge proponent of it, and just looking forward
And we
to
had
the rest of
27
the.
inches of powder. It was wonderful.
Oh yeah, I mean, no,
It was nice.
those meetings too. I mean, the CEOs you bring, the LPs you all bring together, that must be an incredibly smart and incredibly fantastic room, and probably just so inspiring, just to
It's
get that
very
group
inspiring. It's
together.
very
Yeah.
inspiring.
I think looking forward, before we cap things off, I really want to just go through a few rapid fire questions.
Sure.
Yeah, you feel, test the waters, and just kind of look forward to the future and what kind of brings us to the next century. Um, I would say for you as a question, I mean, having traversed such a breadth of roles across the bio innovation landscape, do you have any advice for these earlier folks in their careers really seeking to pursue entrepreneurship, start their own company, join into this, century of biology?
A lot of folks early on in their career think they have it all planned out and they get frustrated when it doesn't perfectly happen. I was a former musician for several years before I went back to school, and I still can't believe that I've been able to make that kind of a pivot. So don't be afraid to say yes to something that you think is new and exciting and different. Don't think that you have all of the answers and that your path is already set, because it is not. It is not.
Fantastic advice. And next time we have you on for a collaboration or an episode, we're going to need that mixtape as well. We're slowly
Awesome.
forming a BIOS group of musicians and bands that have had on. And I think
Love it.
one day we really hope we're going to have just like a whole live set. So
Love it.
hope to have you on soon for the collab. Um, Going forward, I mean, taking that a step further, having been on both sides of the table, pharma and investor, I mean, what advice would you give? I mean, founders seeking to engage and work with higher level FDA regulation, and what about folks that are in pharma seeking to collaborate with early stage innovation? Do you have any recommendations to folks kind of pursuing that trend?
Talk to partners early and be clear that you're like, I'm coming to you way earlier than I should be. Go to investors like us way earlier than you should. Like we're raising like 100K, like we're just starting, whatever. Start those relationships early, because if you do that, as we talked about earlier, when somebody comes and says, hey, I got around, this is closing by the end of the week, are you in? And you're like, hi, my name's Justin, it's very nice to meet you. I work at this company called Prime Movers Lab. And it just doesn't work like that. And so I understand that when there's fast paced, and back in the 2000 and 2020, 2021, there was that kind of frothiness where people just kind of didn't do diligence or whatnot. We didn't really do that. We do our diligence. We have to, because we lead. And so it's easier to make an investment when you have a long standing relationship with the person. And it doesn't necessarily need to be a friendship. It can very much be just, hey, we're just going to send you our update. Whether you read it or not, great. We just love to send it to you. Ask, but certainly send it to them. Don't just spam a bunch of VCs, because they don't like that. But at the same time, don't be afraid to send your stuff.
100%. As we're wrapping up the episode here too, I mean, Justin, how do you spend your free time? What do you do outside of
I've
EC?
got 3 boys under 9. I love spending time with them and my wife. I don't get to spend enough traveling too much recently, but I play a lot of guitar and ukulele around the house, and a lot of chess with my son, and reading to the younger ones, and enjoying life, going out and having good dinners. I do like to ski. I'm going to need to become a much better skier. And then I read voraciously, follow great industry stuff like BIOS community, and then really just dig into literature. It's wonderful to follow amazing founders and just be constantly kind of wowed by all the great biology that's being done every day, chemistry and physics in there too.
Fantastic, Justin. I mean, any other closing thoughts, shameless plugs?
No,
Uh,
never forget where you came from. Whether I stay in Oklahoma the rest of my life, whether you change jobs or change careers, never forget where you came from, because no matter what, everything has changed, and you don't lose who you are.
how can our
I would
audience
say,
hear more about your work?
sorry. About our work, primemoverslab.com, at Prime Movers Lab on Twitter. I'm at Briggsley. We go to Medium and type in Prime Movers Lab or any one of our portfolio companies, and you'll see our content. We've got a bunch of great webinars on YouTube, right next to the BIOS channel. I'm sure we're like down the hall from each other virtually. Those kind of things. Yeah.
Sweet. I mean, thank you so much again, Justin, for an absolutely fantastic
Likewise,
episode.
man.
Really grateful for your time, and take care. Thanks again so much.
Well, this is the first time I've ever been on the other side of the mic. I did about 30 episodes of a podcast of my own long time ago. So it's a great honor to be on this. Was my first ever podcast as a guest. I'm sure I rambled, but I hope it was a good episode for everyone. And thank you, Drew, for your time. You're a great interview.
Happy to have you. Thank you so much, Justin.
Cheers.